Hello and welcome back to On the Brink. So in November 2019, I went to the Tlon offices in San Francisco and I sat down with Christian Langalis and Logan Allen, and they gave me a full explainer on Urbit, basically from scratch, which is actually one of our most popular episodes of all time. And I've always wanted to revisit the Urbit project and get an understanding of its roadmap and its viability beyond just the 101 level explainer. As the cracks in the internet began to show through really last month, as we saw AWS politicizing its service and some pretty coordinated deplatformings at the infrastructure level, I thought the time was nigh to revisit the Urbit project. And I've also been following it pretty closely, and it's made some really great strides forward in terms of usability, and you don't have to use the command line to use it anymore, which is great. So we brought Galen Wolfe-Pauly on the show, who's the co-founder of Tlon, to talk about the state of Urbit and what's new in the last 18 months or so. This is a more general conversation about the nature of internet platforms, the politicization of internet infrastructure, and of course, developments with Urbit itself. Now, if you'd like to try out hosting, they're rolling it out in a closed beta. You can use the link in the show notes to inform the folks at Tlon that you're interested in hosting, and hopefully we can get you on the hosted platform ASAP. If you do get on Urbit, you can find me at Tickbin Wixub. So without further ado, let's dive into the episode.
Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
The federal government loans American International Group, AIG, $85 billion.
This is a different kind of market, and the Fed is asleep.
The federal government is stepping in to stabilize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two mortgage giants that have been threatened by the housing crisis.
The Bank of England has pumped £75 billion more into Britain's ailing economy with a new round of quantitative easing.
You print a couple $1 trillion, and all of a sudden, people start to worry. So out of this worry, we have something called the Bitcoin.
Well, Galen, welcome to On the Brink. This is our second Urbit episode. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'm happy that Urbit is interesting enough to have two episodes.
Yeah, we don't often do, repeat episodes on the same topic, but the first one we did with Christian and Logan was very popular. So that was, to this day, remains one of our most popular episodes.
That's great.
And a lot has changed with Urbit. There's a lot of new stuff to talk about. That first episode was in November 2019. So it's been well over a year now. And I am now using Urbit in a hosted manner, which is great. I mean, some people might say that's contradictory and against the original vision of Urbit or whatever, but it's very convenient. So there's a lot of new stuff to talk about.
It's true. Yeah. Should we start at the top or should we dive right into the difference? I wish I could remember better what they had talked about the first time around.
I mean, I'll direct people to the first episode, which is really meant to be a full explainer of the Urbit system from scratch, which probably can't be done in an hour. So I don't know how we managed to do it the first time around. But what about a kind of 3-minute, high level
even shorter.
Urbit?
Yeah, let's just do the various most basics. So, yeah, before we jump into details, Urbit is two things, technically. So there's an identity system and an operating system, say what we call an overlay OS. So it's basically just a virtual machine on the OS side. But let's start with ID. So there are two sort of fundamental problems with the internet. I don't own my identity or my network address. Those things we don't sort of generally treat as property in the current system. And then the server stack has become so complicated that for the most part, you run a company if you're going to build an app of any kind. So we address this problem by building two components. The identity system is basically a global PKI where the idea is to get individuals to own their name and network address as a simple pseudonym that is also a crypto wallet, and you can send packets to if you use that name to boot a node on the network of Urbit OS instances. So these instances are each little virtual machines running on servers. You could run them on your phone or your laptop or on any cloud server. They create their own network, And the idea is to build sort of a single, very simple, self-contained system that can store your data, run applications, and just let you communicate and collaborate in similar ways to what we use basically consumer SaaS for. But the idea is to actually, build a platform that individuals can own and explore what's possible with without, needing a third party. So for a developer, this means in the future you could develop software for Urbit, just ship it to the network, individuals run it themselves. The idea from just an individual user standpoint is hopefully something similar to kind of like a Western version of WeChat. So my Urbit node stores everything, runs everything I need. I log into one place where I can chat with people, book a restaurant, pay that restaurant, pay my friends, whatever, engage in communication and commerce freely in a way that you can never do in this kind of like fragmented SaaS world. I think that was less than 3 minutes.
Yeah,
but it's obviously more than you can.
No, that was very concise.
You can go on for a long time. Anyway, that's the basic lay of the land.
What would you say is a more revealing question to answer about Urbit? The purpose of the network or what it actually allows you to do?
Both important question. I mean, I feel like the purpose is to get people control over their computing again. Pretty much everything we do with computers with network connections involves some company. Bitcoin's obviously an exception to that, and so I always think of Urbit as this kind of like natural complement to any blockchain-based system. They're kind of spiritually connected. I mean, what you can do with Urbit today, chat, share links, write with a group of people. Honestly, so Landscape, which is a kind of main little app that we've built on top that people use is what people use in a hosted environment. As it gets more mature, I feel like just the ability to talk to people with no third party in the middle and collaborate on, working together. So we use this as the company and for the broader Urbit community. It's very simple, but there's nothing quite like it because everything else is incentivized to, keep you around or sell you something.
Right. Does it ever strike you as, I don't know, kind of a little bit entertaining that Urbit has had all of this work put into it, and then when it comes to describe what you can currently do with Urbit, a lot of it has this, the typical response is, well, you can chat with your friends.
Yeah, it's hilarious, honestly. Like, the funny thing is, like, the amount of work that it takes to allow you to just to chat with your friends where you're, and on a platform or a network where you're not worried about that thing disappearing, no one's spying on you, the interface isn't sort of trying to keep you around all the time. It sounds like such a simple thing, but it's actually like a frustratingly hard and kind of big problem.
Yeah.
There are many things that Urbit will do in the future, but I think people actually overlook, it's kind of similar to, I feel like this is, it's like digital money is deceptively difficult too.
Yeah. What's that expression? If you want to build an apple pie from scratch, you first have to invent the universe.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And that is the history of this project. Is that you're like, oh, it'd be nice if people could compute freely together. Oh wait, we have to reinvent most of computing or quite a lot of it in order to do that. Yeah,
well, we've certainly gotten a very direct look into the risks of concentrating, consumer SaaS with a small handful of internet oligopolies in the last couple of weeks. Regardless of, the morality of the situation, it is disconcerting to see how few companies wield so much power in terms of our internet footprints. So I think the Urbit project is more urgent than ever. I mean, it's been urgent, but it's sort of especially urgent now.
Yeah, it's such a strange time because I agree. I mean, I would have agreed with that 5 years ago. And it's interesting to see. I mean, we live in such a strange and fascinating and incredible period of history, honestly. the internet itself is so significant in terms of changing the way that we form communities and communicate with one another. But yeah, it's also deeply flawed. But for such a long time, no one was really, I mean, most people are just not either aware of or willing to admit the depth of those problems. And then only in the last couple of weeks or months, I mean, very short time, it's like everyone is aware of this all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And we're actually, and Urbit has matured a lot. Like Urbit is, we were talking about this earlier, but for me, the problem, years ago, or as I've been working on this thing, that I'd be able to argue, I think, relatively compellingly, hey, the system doesn't work. We should rebuild it. And most of the time, you can get someone to agree with that, but they're like, okay, sure, but like, what can I do? Like, what can I use as an alternative? And for the most part, I just, Urbit's sort of like, well, Urbit's not really ready yet. If you're a nerd, you want to play with it, go for it. And now it's like, well, actually, we're pretty close. And we use it ourselves. And if you're willing to host yourself, like, yeah, I mean, people start their own communities on Urbit all the time now.
Yeah.
So it's it seems like this shift in, going from centralization to decentralization, like, I think it's actually totally possible. Whereas honestly, if you'd, I mean, I probably wouldn't have said this publicly, but if you'd asked me honestly, so 5 years about 5 years ago, even like 2017, I was like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's the right thing to do, but can we actually pull this off? I don't know. And I think I would have said that about basically anybody in this space. And right now I'm like, oh, this is going to happen. It's amazing.
So before we dive in, I have one more question for you. So, I've become rather pessimistic about this thing we call the internet. Like, if you think back to the way it was described in 1994 kind of thing, the internet that we sort of have today, the like consumer internet, doesn't resemble that at all. It's like very, very siloed on a application basis, on a geographic basis. You have different internets. And it almost seems like there isn't a single internet the way that people sort of envisioned it in the 90s. So would you say you're optimistic or sort of pessimistic over the fate of this thing that we call the internet?
Well, the internet's such a slippery word, because if you mean the internet in terms of this sort of core protocol suite, not to be too much of a nerd about it, but like, I don't know, HTTP, TCP, IP, DNS, that's not going away. But I think that the internet, as most people experience it, is basically like TV. And I also think that's not going away. But I think the original dream of the internet being this, basically a set of open protocols for people to communicate, collaborate, figure out how to coordinate themselves. I think that in a way, like, that's coming back. And that was something we hoped to get out of that protocol suite. But that protocol suite actually wasn't designed for billions of people to be freely connected. It works fine if everybody's like, or a small community of hackers basically are running their own nodes. But those protocols are just not designed for the way that we use the internet today.
Yeah, I kind of think about it like a city where you've got, the internet of like the early 2000s was a city with a lot of like grimy alleyways where, like people could hang out without too much scrutiny, and you had like 4chan and like similar such gathering places for various malcontents. And then the internet of today is like rapidly changing into a place that's brightly lit everywhere, with no like dirty holes anywhere, and it's sort of very sanitized and clean. And it seems like there's like a certain loss of culture from undergoing that process. Does that analogy kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think that's broadly true, but I don't know if I think, to me, the way I think about it's like, if you think about the physical world, so when we travel to different cities, even within a single country, and it doesn't matter which country really, like the cities always reflect the people that live there, even neighborhoods, and they are very different, even in the way that they're built or the way that they're managed. And I think of definitely sort of like the American experiment or the American system of government, and you can find that all over the West, is being mostly designed to preserve and almost encourage those differences. It's like, we got all these different kinds of people. We want them to be able to live together and share infrastructure, and we're going to try to figure out how to make that work. the problem is that in the digital world, we never, like that charter in a way, like never really existed. And so I just think the centralization of power among these what are effectively media companies that we use to communicate with each other, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, it's a total accident. And these people have ended up in this position of power just because they were actually, I think, very earnestly just excited in building stuff that worked. And I think they still feel that way. The problem is that they're building it as sort of in their own image, in the culture that they believe in and that they want to participate in. And the reality is there are all kinds of different people out there who want to live differently and think differently. And the software that they build can't be adapted. It can't be adapted at all. It's completely monolithic. And that's true at a technical level, and it's true at an experiential level. And then we intuitively know that it sucks, basically, because the result is that everyone is kind of the same. Like the internet is just this, it's like Disneyland. I mean, Disneyland's fine, but if the whole world's like Disneyland.
I'm constantly struck by the fact that these large internet oligopolies or platforms, or whatever you want to call them, aspire to have a single all-encompassing terms of service. And like, you can just interchange terms of service with legal system and it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And then I think about how the actual world works, and you have, hundreds of countries and, untold thousands of administrative subdivisions, and people have local political units that are relevant to them, and people sort of self-associate into their local set of laws and norms and political, modes of governance that are totally distinct from each other. And there is no single global law, and we've always rejected that. And yet there's this like utopian idea that pervades the governance of these internet networks that somehow you can jam everybody into a single legal setting and have it work. And it just doesn't seem to work, but they keep trying.
Well, they have no choice. Like they run physical infrastructure, and they run companies that have, that exist within a single jurisdiction for the most part, or are primarily governed by one jurisdiction. It's sort of like that's just the byproduct of centralization. There's no way, you're never going to change that so long as there's one company running the server side. It's just the most natural thing in the world. Like I agree that it's stupid, or it just feels weird. It's not it doesn't suit the people that depend on this stuff. But it's controlled by this tiny minority of people. I mean, it's going to reflect their values.
We don't even question it, though. It's not even something that people think about that often. Like, you don't think, it's weird that Facebook is trying to unite 4 billion people under a single standard of rules. Like, zoom out for a second, and it's like, that's the craziest thing ever.
It's completely insane. It's always been insane. Yeah, it's totally nuts. I don't know. It was nuts to me when I got a Facebook account in probably like 2004 or whatever. I mean, it just seems, I don't know. I grew up on the internet where I actually was, writing programs on a computer that I controlled. And that's like this incredible vehicle for creativity. And I think even conventional sort of ordinary creativity, I don't think you need to be a programmer to sort of like experience the magic, or sort of like the general purpose computing is like an incredibly powerful thing that everyone should have access to. And like nothing about the current internet is about providing people with general purpose computing or communication tools. It's just completely fucked, like sort of from the outset. I don't know. I agree that it's weird that it's not a commonplace, but that's kind of the interesting thing about the present, is that it's sort of becoming a commonplace. Like, oh, this is a serious problem, and which makes me that makes me very optimistic, I guess. A year ago, like at the time you guys recorded this last episode, right? Like a year ago, it was so normal for me to have a conversation about Urbit, and people be like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, but it's probably like, how are you going to convince people to believe in this? And my position is always like, okay, we're going to have to kind of convince the world that this is the right thing. And now I'm like, it's obvious. Like you don't have to convince anyone.
Yeah, I remember on that episode asking Christian and Logan whether Urbit was computational Esperanto, and that it would be a great, elegant system that no one would ever see the need to use. But that's, as you say, that seems like a less relevant question today.
I mean, there are plenty of Urbit is technically unusual because it's solving this problem that most people have ignored for a really long time, which is how do you get a bunch of people to compute the same way? If you have all these nodes out on the network, they somehow have to share a model of computing, which is generally not how most conventional software has been built, right? Because there's one server. Well, that one server enforces the model of computing. So there's a bunch of everything that's kind of weird technically about Urbit comes from this single, approach, which is actually not that different from building a blockchain, right?
Yeah.
You're hey, we just have to have one way that we define the state transition from this state to my next state. So anyway, I think it's now it's basically defensible. We built this Esperanto, but it's solving a very specific problem that is I think quite urgent.
Yeah. So let's talk about what is new with Urbit in the last kind of 13, 14 months since we last talked about it on the brink. So you guys had we were joking, it was kind of like the moment where you break the champagne bottle against the side of the ship. So you had an OS1 launch. You now have hosting. So tell us about what those things mean.
Yeah, so the challenge it's kind of similar to what I was saying before. I've always wanted to be able to, just offer someone an alternative, something that has the, exact same level of approachable usability as any conventional app, but that gives you the sort of freedom and flexibility that one would get when running their own server. So the first challenge we set ourselves was all right, we have to actually stop using this stuff ourselves. Just for daily communication, coordination at the company and within the community, we got to build something that we can just depend on. We have to homestead this thing. And so that was we experimented with a bunch of different stuff. And then when you talk to Christian and Logan, so about a year and a half ago, we were sort of honing in on what we really want is something where we can bring together a few different modes of communicating, which ended up being, for now, and we'll probably expand a little bit, but basically chat, sharing links, writing notes, and having long form discussion, and bring those all together in one interface that's centered around groups. So it's build a group, and then that group shares channels, which can be of any of those types. That was kind of that's landscape. So landscape is the thing that you use through a browser that makes Urbit this whole new system approachable and understandable at the level of a web app. We announced that, I think in March. It's right in the beginning of COVID. It was sort of strange timing. Mm-hmm. It was still pretty rough, honestly. It was very classic MVP. I think we had adapted ourselves to using it, but it was somewhat painful to use at the beginning. It's gotten a lot better over the course of the year. At this point, it's actually, I think, quite good. It lacks two major things that are on the way pretty soon. Should be just mobile app and push notifications, so you can actually just use this thing as a messenger. So messenger where you actually, it's I love, I use Signal all the time. I think Telegram is pretty good. Well, they sort of trade off usability, but you're still always using a third party there. So the idea that I can have something in my pocket that just connects to something I own, and I can use that for communication is something I'm looking forward to a lot. And the way that'll be made easy for most people to use is through hosting. So you can actually go to Tlon.io, sign up, get onboarded pretty quickly, and just get going. The barrier to entry is on its way down very quickly. You've gotten a preview of that. We've kind of tried to onboard some friends while we're sort of continuously scrambling to make this thing better. But it's coming along really nicely. I'd say in the next quarter or so, it'll be at the point where we'll be more aggressively bringing people on. Whereas now I'd say it's still basically kind of late stage beta, the waiting list. We're onboarding people slowly.
Yeah, I don't want to flex, but I am on Urbit hosting. It's great. Works great. Been using it. So thank you.
Yeah, the only problem is I can't get your attention through Urbit yet. But
that's true. I do need a way to be notified when you text me on there. So
We're getting there.
I think it might be instructive to talk about the governance mode on Urbit. So obviously when something happens on Twitter that people don't like, you sort of report them to the commissar, and then Twitter decides whether they should just obliterate their account or not. So that's one model of governance, right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of feudal in nature. What is it like on Urbit? What is it like if there is, some entity, an Urbit, planet, star, galaxy that you sort of dislike or you find to be malevolent? How do you disassociate with them? Given that it's like a pretty decentralized network.
Yeah. So you're making me think I should probably lay a little bit more groundwork. So your Urbit ID is this synthetic name. It's like a automatically generated pseudonym. We issue these names are finite, so they have value, which by the idea is anyway that because they cost something, the network is Sybil resistant by default. Not only do you have to buy an address, but you need what we call a sponsor. So a sponsor basically is just this, sort of binary, hey, I'm comfortable routing packets for this person. It's not really a full-blown reputation. It's just like, this is someone I'm willing to support being on the network. And so let's see. So these addresses I always struggle to like not give too much detail. The address space is a whole system that's actually deployed to the blockchain and, is self-governing and self-updating. And we could get into the details if you think it's relevant.
Well, we covered it in the last show, so I'll refer people to the last show for the address-based discussion.
Got it. I guess the main thing to understand as it relates to how the network is governed is that like there's a pretty clear distinction between what goes on at the network level or the Urbit ID level versus like what goes on at the community level. So when you're issued this address, you own it with a key. It's yours, like a like Bitcoin is yours or whatever. But you need a sponsor. So your sponsor can reject you at the network level, which we expect would be something like someone is not comfortable for legal reasons, basically routing packets for you or helping you with peer discovery. Your packets are all encrypted. So, that's something that's kind of like an escalated issue. It's like your ISP banning you. And so in general, you'd assume that level of like someone being deplatformed or kicked off of Urbit is pretty rare. Sponsorship is two-way and people can move. So if you have an Urbit ID and you decide that actually your sponsor is slow or I don't know, they're suspicious for some reason, whatever, you can move to a new one and it can go the other way where your sponsor can reject you. Anyway, you'd assume that's relatively rare, but it's a good backstop for the sort of health of the network overall, right? If you have bad actors, you do want to be able to potentially blacklist them or just have, there's no one sponsor them. So then when it comes to, actual day-to-day, like how do you do content moderation? Yeah, like we were talking about before, it's a little bit more similar to federated systems like Mastodon. That's basically up to the community. And each community is totally independent. And everything on the network is peer-to-peer once peers discover one another. So if you decide to start a group and invite all your friends to it, and you can basically set whatever rules you like and decide who gets to stay and who you want to ban. And we don't even know that you exist, basically, which is not that different than like a Signal group chat or something like that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
So when you think about the different political units on Urbit, I know the culture is still developing and you probably won't know for some time what the emergent qualities are like. Do you think of the political and administrative units in terms of galaxies, stars, and planets, or is there a different taxonomy that you use to sort of think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty rhizomatic, to borrow a phrase or whatever. So trying to think of the outer space hierarchy, so galaxies, stars, planets, is basically just the infrastructure. And you could imagine planets and stars sort of rebalancing themselves to the most efficient infrastructure nodes. Most people shouldn't notice or care about that, and it shouldn't reflect the communities that are built, because communities are built peer to peer. And so those rich and complicated, I like to use the word archipelago, right? It's like, this is just a bunch of, completely ad hoc connections between the people on the network that self-govern and self-police and, do whatever they like. I do think it's not that dissimilar from what you'd find. I mean, I'm sure if you look at a map of like Telegram groups or something, it's really not that different from that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny that we have to describe this as kind of an alternative to the default system, whereas this is a more organic and natural system fundamentally. I mean, it more closely maps onto how humans actually work.
Right. I mean, that's pretty much how we think about what we do, right? It's like, you just want to like build a network or build the tools that let people decide how they're going to organize themselves. And certainly want those tools to be, exceptionally high quality and long lasting. Although, let's be honest, they probably wouldn't be adopted as tools if they weren't. And what people do with them is, build their own image, they build the image of their communities. So it's like, if you wonder what Urbit is supposed to look like, it's like, well, it's supposed to look like the real world, I guess.
Yeah, as opposed to these kind of artificial, uni-node networks where there's like effectively a single dictator in charge of everything, which seems incredibly archaic and old-fashioned. It makes me think of Babylon or something, with the king, handing down decisions and pointing to like a code scrawled in, a clay tablet somewhere.
I mean, it's totally insane. Like, Panopticon, not far off. I often think of it like, the analogy I also use is like, living on these platforms is like going to Vegas. I'm not a big fan of Vegas, so maybe some people are, but just if you had to live your whole life in a hotel in Vegas, meaning you can't modify your room, like everything is climate controlled, like it's totally determined by the entities there to basically make money on you. And like, maybe it's fun to go to Vegas for a while, but like, you don't want to live in Vegas.
Wow, that's a great analogy. Yeah, I will confess I'm not a fan of Vegas either. I found it hellish when I was there. So
it's really tough. I mean, it's just hard on your body, like you don't feel good because it's not. I think it's just because it's so tightly controlled, like it doesn't. It's like Vegas, if Vegas was a prison. That's kind of how I look at like the modern internet, because you're stuck. Like, you have no alternative. It's like Vegas, but you cannot leave.
So Galen, I've developed this like hypothesis that I've been told by lawyers is wrong from a legal perspective, but I'm sort of undeterred. Which is basically that users of social media literally own their content in a kind of physical sense. So it's their property. They own their handles and they own everything they produce. That's their commercial labor, has commercial and social value. And they should have the equivalent of digital squatters' rights. And now, of course, I'm aware of the fact that the terms of service don't see it that way. But I'm curious as to whether you think there's any merit to that theory or normative opinion.
I mean, from a technical standpoint, Urbit very much treats your data like your personal property and makes sure that your identity and network address are as much your personal property as possible. It's an interesting question. Because I'm not sure what the precedent is, like, is speech property? I mean, I suppose if you write it, it's like I shouldn't even dabble into this because I wouldn't understand that, or I don't have like immediate like background.
The analogy I would give would be people on the frontier that, I know this is also like an idealized analogy because like, was there ever truly an uninhabited Western frontier? Like, of course, no, like, people had to displace the Native Americans, but, imagine for a second there weren't any, and, you stake your claim out in the frontier and you build your homestead. Even if that land was owned by, Lord Delaware, 3,000 miles away in England, once you've sort of, under the Lockean theory, once you've mixed your labor with the land, you maybe have a pretty legitimate claim to that land. And so at that point, you know, you can sort of claim that it's yours. So that's what I refer to when I say, like, you know, digital squatters' rights or digital homesteading.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that you did it in Vegas, and the
Right.
guy who runs the hotel like makes so much money on that hotel that he's like, no fucking way that you're getting squatters' rights here.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's like it's just a question of who's in power. It's not a question of whether you're right. So I'd agree with you in theory, obviously, right? Because like Urbit wants to provide those affordances, but I'm not sure if you just think of just the power dynamics and how much money is involved, I'm like that one is not.
Yeah. You're
I
going to
mean,
lose that
that's the
fight.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, the other big topic of the day is obviously, you know, what I would refer to as the politicization of internet infrastructure. And it's not just applications. Like, applications was, you know, somewhat perturbing to see politicized. Like, okay, you know, don't like Twitter, well, okay, build your own Twitter. But then it gets more perturbing when it goes deeper down the stack, in my view, to the more essential, you know, systems of the internet, hosting, DNS, DDoS protection. To me, there's something a little different about AWS, you know, saying, hey, like Parler can't use our service, as opposed to Twitter saying, hey, we're not going to give you a microphone. Do you kind of share that intuition?
It's funny. I don't fault AWS in this instance because I think I understand how they're acting. They're just like, we don't want to deal with this. And they have every right to say that.
Yeah.
My position is, I think, probably what you might expect, which is like, yeah, well, if you had protocols for all this stuff, then you wouldn't have this problem, you know? Like, hosts shouldn't be put in this position because, anyway, I don't know if you want to dive down that rabbit hole, but I think to me, it seems like maybe you're getting I tend to be much more of a like, I'm like, well, if you have a problem like this, then you didn't build it right. You know, it's like it's a consequence of something going on about like the architecture of the thing. It's not about like this kind of high level, you know, when you're seeing like a bug, it's the same thing when you're building software, right? Like you see a lot of trivial bugs. Well, there's something architecturally unsound about it, probably.
Sure.
So I feel like this is like, you know, the whole system is pretty weird.
So
that's because applications are so complicated. They're so big and complicated. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you're right. So I guess the natural follow-up is, how resistant is Urbit to any internet providers at the service level, you know, trying to deplatform Urbit for whatever reason? Maybe they listen to this podcast and they don't like it. You know, how resistant is it at the hosting level? And then if you imagine a constellation of users running their own Urbits.
Yeah, we can try and, it's like doing a security audit or something, you know, you're like, you're also trying to produce the manual for an attacker or something. So yeah, I think that Urbit is designed to be able to be run by anybody, relatively technical. It's actually not that hard. You can just follow some instructions. We sort of, I think for a long time, we were often actually probably more, for any of the listeners who like, you know, looked at our installations instructions, they were like, oh, you might not want to try this. It was actually more because the system itself was still young. You can practically just copy and paste commands into the command line to boot an Urbit. It's quite easy by comparison to most software. So the reason that matters is that yes, everybody could run their own node. So when it comes to like exposure to hosts, that I think is relatively easy to mitigate. Meaning, if we were, so it's important to draw the distinction. I work for Tlon, the company that works on this thing, and Urbit itself is owned by lots of people, and it's just this protocol. Tlon provides hosting, so we have some exposure to the infrastructure that we use. The fact that we're a U.S. company, I mean, we have all kinds of exposure probably. So Tlon is vaporized by whatever, by our hosts, and, you know, a concerted effort by hosts and state actors and so on. Can Urbit survive? Well, yeah, everybody can go and host themselves. It's not that difficult. The Urbit community is very motivated to make this as easy as possible, even in terms of running your own hardware. It's a pretty enthusiastic community of people who run Urbit on Raspberry Pis and want that to be as easy as it can be. I tend to think then, though, that the likely outcome is that there's a mix of people who are hosted and people who are self-hosted, and that ideally that there's a balance there, because that balance provides almost this kind of herd immunity for the whole platform. Meaning basically that like Urbit should be, as risky as Signal or Telegram. It's a sure, like we provide people good privacy and durability guarantees. There are pitfalls to that, but overall it's similar to what people get in the real world, and so it has sort of precedent for why I think it's like not something that needs that is kind of like exactly at odds with the state or something like that. And the fact that there are mixed ways for people to keep this thing online is just like generally good for the robustness of the network overall. So anyway, yeah, I think the likely outcome is that you have lots of people doing both self-hosting, hosting in bunkers in Iceland or whatever, and there's a whole sort of spectrum of like, depending on what type of person you are, you have a more or less resilient Urbit hosting setup. It's very easy to host one in your closet if you are.
That's exactly analogous to Bitcoin. You can you have the capacity to run your own node if you like, but you can also, now there's a bunch of hosted tools, aka custodians and exchanges out there that people do take advantage of. 20 to 30% of all Bitcoins at least are held with these third parties.
Is that it?
Well,
I would have thought there'd be more.
That was my last count, but you can probably find some more if you were to be more thorough. But I mean, I was encouraged when I did that analysis, but there's no way. Good, yeah, it's hard for me to identify by looking at an arbitrary coin on the blockchain whether it's hosted or not. So
yeah, I think I like one good indicator is that this is a pretty lively debate at the company, within the community, like whether or not hosting is a good thing, because it's way before any of this current like event stuff is going on, because it's an obvious risk, and yeah, there are all kinds of interesting solutions, but I think the important thing is that debate exists, and that debate exists in the Bitcoin community, and it's actually just like it's a legitimate debate, and people should care about it and think about it, and that should push them to come up with lots of different solutions that they can offer back to the people that use this thing, and giving them all the more choice, which is great. So anyway, yeah, I think that will like drive Urbit to be quite resilient.
Yeah, my stance on the question in a Bitcoin context has always been that custodians and effectively Bitcoin banks are completely acceptable, especially if there's a diversity of service providers, with the caveat that it has to be easy to take physical delivery of your Bitcoins and withdraw, so that you can move to a different service provider if they're misbehaving, or you can just completely move to your own self-custody if necessary. And that's the distinction between Bitcoin and like gold, for instance, because it's very hard to take ownership of bars of gold. So I would say with Urbit, I would see it analogously, as long as it's cheap and not too difficult or cumbersome to run your own instance or your own Urbit, the existence of hosting isn't an issue, as long as you still have that sort of withdraw exit option.
Yeah, that reminds me, it's actually worth specifying this. So if we host you, we promise, and I think we'll actually try and make this as much of a like legally defensible promise as possible, that we'll give you your Urbit event log back, like we'll give you data back. And when we give you your data back, this isn't like that useless zip file that Facebook gives you.
Right.
Like we actually give you the entire thing. You can run it yourself. It's really easy to do. And so the like cost of exit is pretty low. The other thing is that maybe you become suspicious of us, and you decide you want to basically revoke our ability to host you. Well, you actually hold the key to your identity, so you could effectively just rekey and lock us out and like shut your Urbit down, like the one that's running in a hosted environment. So yeah, it is similar. In some ways, the sort of ability to lock someone out, and you'd keep the identity, of course, you'd lose your data. Makes it slightly better. Maybe it's just different than Bitcoin, but it's similar. I mean, Urbit and Bitcoin have a lot of things in common.
What do you make of, some people are proposing data portability legislation for social media firms? So basically turning them into, kind of open API systems, such that they would be legally obligated to deliver your data in like a standard format should you want to leave. Does that seem like a viable fix to you, or not really?
I mean, if there was any incentive on it within those companies to actually abide by that legislation, like there has to be some internal incentive to make that actually work well, right? Like it has to actually, like do these companies care if their customers are unhappy? Not really.
Right.
I mean, not really. Like, so really, you really think that's going to happen? I mean, that just seems incredibly unlikely to me, but I will happily, have a drink with any of the proponents of that in 5 or 10 years or whatever. And we can talk about how it played out and maybe it'll work, but it seems unlikely to me.
So before we go, tell us a little bit about the sort of near and medium term future of Urbit. We were talking about hardware a little bit before. We were talking about the distinction between Tlon and Urbit.org. So touch on that briefly before we wrap up.
Yeah. So I think the main thing, like I've been sort of repeating over and over, right, is just you want to get to the point where Urbit is viable as sort of social software for people to start new communities, for some companies probably, and basically just like for people to start knowing what it feels like to actually control their computing in this very simple and straightforward way. So that's like hosting plus their mobile experience plus notifications, and that'll happen in the early part of this year. And then in through the end of the year, I think, Tlon's main goal is just get people on here and get them to actually, experience what it's like to sort of be free from the digital gulag or whatever the internet is swiftly turning into. In doing that, Tlon. So Tlon is a company that we founded quite some time ago now to work on this project. And as Tlon starts to get into the services business, providing hosting, probably working directly with communities to get them using Urbit, we do want Urbit itself to be a platform that people can experiment with, build software for. It's not just meant for social software. You could use it for all kinds of things. And so to that end, we've been working to get Urbit.org, this basically sort of like internal foundation that we've always earmarked a bunch of address space for and wanted to exist. That's getting up and off the ground to really just support, growing the developer community, getting people to understand the system and build on top of it. And so, I think we'll try and get that actually, sort of out the door and independent this year. And there's actually kind of a lot going on there already, just in terms of like, we run a really active grants program, and there's quite a lot of just like developer focused events and community stuff happening there. So I expect that to ramp up quite a bit too. A big thing on that front is really just getting Urbit to the point where we can do really good software distribution over the network itself, which today is possible to experiment with, certainly, and people do run a little bit of third-party software. And I hope by the end of the year it will be relatively easy. So I guess the main thing there is that, our hope for developers in the future is that you have an idea for a weekend project. Great, do it. When you're done with it, just ship it to the entire network and never do DevOps or think about it ever again. Just let people use it. So Urbit.org's mandate broadly, I guess, on one hand is that, make that possible, make it easy for people to develop on top and experiment with Urbit itself. And then, like we were talking about before, make sure that this self-hosted alternative for running your own Urbit is as easy as possible, potentially even, providing the resources at least for people to build their own rigs, which is a sort of something the community seems to really love, which is cool, or just making sure that that's, as easy as it possibly can be. So it'll be a big year. And I mean, we tend to think, Urbit obviously is this pretty ambitious long-term. I'll be doing this forever. We have a long road ahead of us, but we also don't. People often ask me sort of like, okay, what's going to happen to Urbit in 5 years? And I'm like, the funny thing about this project is like, we've always pretty much planned like 6 months out. We know like in the very long term, you're like global computing platform, like this is how people communicate, collaborate, do business. You want to actually like just replace network computing with a new computing platform. And then it's like, well, what do we have to, what's the step? What are the next 2-3 steps? So after that, I don't know, other exciting and interesting things.
But the general trend is back to the land computing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like 1968 again.
So so for people listening who are now curious about Urbit, what is the action item that you would give them? So, how do they get involved?
Yeah, so there's sort of two paths. If you're somewhat technical, you want to play with this thing and see what is actually going on under the hood, go to urbit.org. There are installation and setup instructions there, and there's pretty extensive documentation, tutorials, and so on. If you're not technical and you just think this sounds cool and you want to use it, go to tlon.io, which is, I suppose we could put tlon.io. That's where we're offering hosting. Got a wait list there now, but we're trying to onboard people as quickly as we can. And tell us a little bit about like what you want to do with this thing so we can figure out kind of like how to get you on most effectively. You can also find us on Twitter. That's pretty much the only old world social media that we use. Honestly, otherwise, you just find us on Urbit itself.
Yeah. It's I'm gonna self shill right now. I am tickbin-wicksub, but that's tickbin with a Y in the bin. So hit me up on Urbit, folks.
There you go. That's the best way to get in touch with Nick. So why wouldn't you just you gotta get on the network?
The most self-sovereign way to find me. That's right.
If you want to get the most premium encrypted packets to Nick Carter,
I'm gonna make sure to check my DMs on there more than once a week for sure now. Of which there are many apparently. There's always something in there when I look. So, but yes, I can attest to the fact that it does work. And I think I was able to get live on it with the command line the first time, the way you described copy and paste. But I found that difficult, I will admit.
It's it's not. I mean, yeah, it requires a bit of bots. It's better if you run it on a VM somewhere. Like hosting is I mean, now we also have pretty good, even if you're hosted, like the terminal is not bad. So if you want to experiment with the programming language and even call the APIs, like you can do a lot of that just being hosted. So I think that will be the default on-ramp. I would love for us to, we don't yet have like a free immediate tier. The next thing for hosting it'll be amazing when we can just say like, try this now, spin up a node for you and get it going. It's not quite there yet, but
yeah, I'm looking forward to, like the same way with physical Bitcoin nodes, I'm looking forward to a physical Urbit node, which also doubles as an email server. And maybe it does my cloud storage for me too. Local cloud storage.
Yeah.
I know that sounds like a weird contradiction, but
so
that'd be great.
There's so many pitfalls with this. I meant to mention this earlier, actually. What someone at the company came up with this recently. I really like this. I think the way that should happen is basically that you have a Casa style, whatever, like a little box, a little black cube that's like, milled out of obsidian or whatever. And that thing, that's what you do most of your computing on. There are all kinds of problems running boxes at home. People always course over this, just like dynamic IPs are complicated. ISPs don't like it, whatever. Anyway, what your host should provide, I think, is encrypted backups. So you run this thing at home, but you have a host you're always sending up an encrypted backup to them, so that in the case that whatever your house burns down or the thing disappears for whatever reason, you have a backup somewhere. I like that, actually. I think that's kind of an interesting, like, middle of the road hosting option. And I think we've actually thought about trying to do this. I think we could do it.
Yeah, and if you pair it with multisig, that encrypted backup can be kind of very, very resilient to a number of shocks.
Yeah, you could do some kind of like social recovery stuff for the IP too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Galen, this has been great. Thank you for coming on. It's been a long time coming. My pleasure. Where can people find you on Urbit?
So people seem to be finding me, which is weird.
Is it a secret or is it not a secret?
Oh, it's not a secret.
Okay.
Ravmel Rothdial. I don't know where people seem to be finding that name, but it's out there somewhere.
Okay.
And that's literally the only place that you can find me. I don't use social media otherwise. But yeah, thanks for having me, man. It was fun.
Okay, well, you heard it. Go harass Galen on Urbit itself. This has been great. We'll bring you back in a year's time and see how things changed.
That sounds great. Yeah.